Hello. You may also recognize Ken Sullivan. He was also in the Marshall Fields Chicago Stories episode, or so I hear. I haven't watched it yet. I'll never watch it. That's never going to happen. Anyway, thank you very much for having me here tonight. I'm excited to talk about Marshall Fields. How many of you brought a Marshall Fields thing with you? Anybody? Okay, there's always a couple that bring some stuff. What did you bring? You brought bags. Okay, what else? Somebody else had bring it up. What did you bring?
Sweater set from the country shop.
Awesome. Anybody else wearing anything? Yes. Or not?
Not wearing.
Okay.
But we worked on State Street in 1977.
Wow. You don't look like them. That's terrific. Anybody else? Okay. Well, no matter what, every presentation I do, there's always someone who has brought Marshall Field stuff because it means so much to us. So I am excited to share this information with you. I always like to start with this postcard. This is a postcard of Marshall Fields. Now, we don't send postcards very often anymore. We just don't. But when you do send postcards, have you ever thought about sending a postcard from Nordstrom or Target or Amazon? We just don't think in those terms anymore. So the fact that there was actually, and there are a lot of them, postcards with a department store tells us this was a very different time, and this store meant something to people that shopping today doesn't necessarily need. This postcard tells us a lot. We can see by looking at the postcard that this building was not all made at one time. You can see where there's some different design elements and different roof lines and all of that, which helps us to remember the fact that that block in State Street wasn't all constructed at the very same time. You can also see some spaces in the roof. There are some skylights to let in light because back in the day we didn't have electricity, and it's nice when people can see what they're buying, who tend to buy more when they can see it. So this postcard though tells us more than just that. Oh, wrong way. So this is the back of the postcard. And we know from the postmark that this postcard was sent in 1910. We know 1910, no zip codes because we didn't have those yet. But the fact that this postcard was sent 115 years ago is pretty amazing, isn't it? And not only did somebody buy this postcard and send it to someone, I mean, that's a lot right there, but somebody chose to save it, and probably generations saved this postcard. Right. I think about when somebody passes, what you do with their stuff. You don't save every piece of mail they receive, do you? I know I don't. When can the dumpster get here? And then we just kind of start to get rid of things. So the fact that the generation saved this, because chances are Miss Ada Boswell is probably not with us anymore. Her children probably aren't with us. Her grandchildren may or may not be with us. 120, 115, 120 years. So it's been a while. This means generations have chosen to save this postcard. Maybe even people who didn't even remember who this woman was continue to save the postcard. So were they saving the postcard because of the recipient or the sender, or because of Marshall Fields? It's an interesting question, isn't it? And not only that, but somebody thought this postcard was valuable enough to put it on eBay. And somebody bought that postcard for $1.25 plus shipping. Yeah, so that tells us a lot. So I like to kind of start with that and get us thinking about what Marshall Fields has meant to different people throughout time. My focus in this program is going to be the early days of Marshall Fields because I'm assuming we've all been there back when it was. So we all remember what it was during our lifetime. So I'm going to focus on the early days because I think that's an area we're not as familiar with. So Marshall Fields did not start as Marshall Fields. Marshall Fields, the man, did not it did not just spring from the earth. Owning Marshall Fields, the department store, wouldn't that be a great story? So Fields and Lighter was the first real iteration. Marshall Fields ended up buying Potter Palmer's dry goods store with his buddy, Levi Later. And Potter Palmer was a silent partner, and then eventually he went on his way, and then it was just Field and Lighter. So the name of the store was Field and Lighter. In this period, if you study this period, I don't know if you study kind of, but oh my gosh, the department store names change like every 3 years. And it's these three people and those three people as partnerships evolve and dissolve and reconfigure. So it can be a little tricky to kind of follow the thread. The Field and Lighter started, kind of get used to the wheel on this. Field and Lighter started the way most stores function as a wholesaler. Back in the day, you didn't go shopping. Ladies, we did not go out if we could avoid it. It was disgusting out there. You're wearing a long dress and the streets are dirty and muddy, and there's cows and dogs and pigs and horses and all kinds of animals out there doing the things that they do in the street. There's no pavement. There's maybe wood streets in some places. And you can't go out without an escort. So we were not going shopping very much. Even there wasn't a lot to do when you went shopping. It was not an experience. It was a bunch of stuff kind of pushed in the corner, and the clerk touched it all. You didn't get to really touch it. So shopping was not quite a thing yet, which is again why wholesale made more sense. There were traveling salesmen who would go around with samples and sell to people in towns across the United States. So Field and Lighter was one of those stores. Field and Lighter, however, averaged 32% return. How many of you would like to invest in anything that got you 32%, especially right now, right? 32% would be incredible return. So they really were killing it. Now in 1867, you can see what they were making retail versus wholesale. And clearly this is a wholesale business. They did have some retail, but again, it's very small in comparison. By 1872, retail is definitely coming up, but so is wholesale. So with their wholesale and retail businesses kind of working hand in hand, they're able to keep their prices low. Economy of scale, right? And because there's not a lot of competition for retail, that allows them to grow their retail business pretty quickly. So they sold a lot of their domestic products at a loss, and they made their money on the imported stuff. I don't know if you've read ahead and seen this ad. This is an advertisement for a corset. And corsets were regularly worn by women in the period, but did you know this particular corset, it says, fits all ages, infants to adults. So if you're looking for a baby shower gift, the men wore corsets in this period, women wore corsets, small children wore corsets. A corset was thought to help with digestion and your posture and all that stuff. So if you don't have a corset, there you go. And this was sold at the wholesale Western agent is at the bottom of this. So it just kind of illustrates the sorts of things that Marshall Fields was selling. All right, by 1890, Marshall Fields has what we call a comprehensive product mix. They're selling a lot of things. So you can go there for almost everything. Can't go there for milk, can't go there for eggs, but you can go there for a lot of the rest of the things that you need. And that is important because it becomes a destination. And when a store is a destination and you can get everything, kind of like Amazon today, you can go there and get almost everything. You don't need to worry about going somewhere else. And that convenience is really important. By the 1890s, women started to go out and shop. So shopping became a destination for women that had some affluence. They were able to go out and shop, and many of them went once, twice, maybe 3 times a week. And Marshall Fields made sure that they had some entertainment for them when they went. By the 1890s, you're starting to see ready-to-wear. It's just starting to blossom. So prior to this, people would have bought fabric and had clothing made. So buying ready to wear was sort of a shocker. This image, I like putting this up here because this to me is really interesting. This this is an image of the sales floor. Now think to the last time you were in a department store, did the sales floor look like that? With a bunch of chairs and one or two dresses. Is that how it looked? Yeah. So back in the day, people would have shopped by coming, having a seat and saying, I'd like to see this. And then a fit model would put the dress on and come out and show you the dress. And then if you liked it, you could buy it and then it would be altered to your size. So you didn't get all sweaty in the dressing room, tugging things on and tugging things off. None of that. Lucille Ball actually got her start as a fit model in New York. She looked a lot like a woman who was a regular at some of these clothing stores. So Lucille Ball would be the one that would put the clothes on and came out and showed the clothing. That was one of her first jobs. So it was kind of a regular thing that women were not expected to try them on, and you notice there's not 15 sizes of the item. It's one. I can imagine it looked very clean on the sales floor. I worked at the Woodfield store in men's sportswear for a while, and let me tell you, after Black Friday shopping, trying to get everything put back away. All those, I folded so many Northeast shirts, I can't even tell you. And so imagine just one of each out there, that would have been a lot quicker. So, the other thing I need to mention, by the 1890s, a couple things Marshall Fields did that changed everything. Restaurants. Now imagine if you're a woman and you're shopping in the city in 1890, there's no place for you to eat. You can't go to a tavern. I mean, if you're a lady, go to a tavern. So where will you eat? So now you're limited by your stomach, right? You can only go out until your tummy starts to say, we gotta go. And even more importantly than that, there were no public bathrooms. So now you're not even just limited by your stomach, and you're limited by your bladder as well. And that's problematic. So Marshall Fields had public restrooms and public restaurants, which allowed you to stay all day. And smart, right? It was the clever of Marshall Fields to do that. So having those opportunities gave women a place to go where it was safe for them. They felt like they could go there and they could spend the day and they didn't need to have a man with them to keep them safe or anything like that. And their basic needs were met. It's hard to imagine a time where there wasn't food or bathrooms available. Maybe if you've been on a road trip, you've had that experience where, oh gosh. But generally we're pretty close to having some food. So this was a game changer. Marshall Fields was the kind of place you would go to be seen. Obviously I'm focusing mostly on the State Street store. And you can just see all these open spaces. I mean, I just imagine these 1890s, Gibson girl women, just kind of over the balconies being seen by everyone else. It was important if you were a lady of some status or position to be seen at Marshall Fields. That was where you went. And I can just imagine them kind of, clocking each other and, oh, look, there's so-and-so and there's so-and-so. And it's a beautiful space. Even today, when you walk in, you notice the little details. You compare it to a department store that's been built more recently, compare it to Kohl's or whatever it is. Kohl's does not have, I know, they just don't, they don't have that attention to detail, that elegance. I was at the State Street store not too long ago, and even just the elevator buttons. Everything is really very pretty and elegant, including that mosaic on the ceiling. If you have not seen it, definitely for homework, you need to see it. It is incredible. It is the largest Tiffany mosaic in the world. So it is not a Tiffany window, but it is a mosaic, and it is the largest one ever done by the Tiffany company. And I've got a couple close-up pictures. Just so you can see the detail, because it is incredible. Now that it's Macy's, you can probably walk in and just lay down on the floor. It's not as crowded as it was, and just look up and see it and imagine just the beauty of it. And again, that didn't sell any extra products. Oh, well, that this is about having the atmosphere, which was important for Marshall Fields. But again, this specifically is not selling more merchandise. It's encouraging people to enjoy being in the store. Here's another close up. Yeah, isn't it just stunning? I have one like this in my house. And here's another close up, just so again you can see the color, because it is incredible. So Marshall Fields, in addition to things like that mosaic, they also had ladies and men's lounges. So when you think about going to a store, Marshall Fields or any other store, you probably don't think about the lounge, because in our lifetime they didn't have such things. But back in the early days, they had these lounges where you could go and manage your social affairs. I mean, imagine going to a department store to manage your social affairs. But think about how clever that is for Marshall Fields, because Marshall Fields has all the things you need for your social affairs. They've got the stationery, they've got the pens, they've got all the resources right there. And Marshall Fields did something that banks do today. They make themselves sticky, where it's hard to quit. You might get mad at your bank, but it's hard to quit your bank. By the time you deal with all the direct deposits and all the other, forget it. So Marshall Fields made themselves sticky in a positive way. They provided everything so you didn't need to leave. So they had writing tables and reading materials. You could go there and read the newspaper, read a magazine. You could rest if you were tired from, a long day of shopping. And this was considered a place you needed to go on your journey to Marshall Fields. So again, no one cares if I'm tired when I go out. I don't know about you. No one's ever said, gosh, are you tired? Do you need a place to rest? No. But Marshall Fields said that. And not just to women, but also for men. So, really, and these are large spaces. You can see from the photo just how big this is. This is not like today, if we had a little rest area, it would be like 2 chairs in a corner. But this is significant. In addition, Marshall Fields at one time had 7 restaurants in the State Street store. 7 restaurants. And by the way, Ken has menus for 6 of the 7 he brought with it. So 7 restaurants. Now think about this. Marshall Fields is really in the business of selling stuff. They're not a restaurant business. So why do they have all these restaurants? I hear some of you whispering the answer. Yeah, it gets people in the store. And if you come to the store, you're going to stay in the store. And if you're there, of course you're going to buy something. I mean, you're just going to have to. You're probably going to buy some Prangos and, something else. You'll buy some stuff. And this grill room image, wow, this looks like such a nice, it looks like a Florida, sort of like a loggia kind of a thing. It just looks really pretty. And every one of them look pretty. This is another one of the writing rooms. Here's another restaurant. This is a tea room. And again, it just, it's really just a beautiful environment. And I can imagine when you're in that beautiful environment, you want to stay in that beautiful environment, and you want to be beautiful, and you want to buy beautiful things and get them in a nice green bag and bring them home, right? This is the grill room. An image of that. This is part of the store for men. How many of you remember the store for men across the street? Remember that? Yeah. So let me tell you the story about the store for men. Has anyone heard about the store for men? The story of why? No, yes. So the store for men was designed by Daniel Burnham. Hopefully you're familiar with him. Daniel Burnham was one of the major architects in Chicago around the turn of the century. He was the one who designed the lakefront and many of the important buildings. And he designed the store for men. The second president of Marshall Fields, after Marshall Fields, the man passed away, the next president was like, oh, we've got to get these cigar smoking men out of here. Like they're messing up the main store. We need to ship them across the way. So they started building this store for men, which opened in a big Chicago year, 1893. All the good stuff in Chicago happened in 1893, right? So, just in time for the World's Fair opens across the street, and now all the things that were for men were over in the men's store. Who was the second president of Marshall Fields? Does anybody know? Did you do the reading before class today? Do you know?
John G. Shedd.
It was John G. Shedd. Yeah, you're the first person. I've done over 100 of these, and you're the first person who knew.
Didn't that piss off Henry Selfridge, and that's what he got?
You what?
Didn't that piss off Henry Selfridge, and that's what he bought?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, it is. So, this picture, this image just helps me to imagine, like, this, you can smell the cigar smoke and the bourbon. Like, that's a man's place. And they did a really nice job of designing all of these spaces to really fit the needs of the people who would be in there. So Marshall Fields, 1914, they are the largest department store in the entire world. Did you know we held the title at one time? In the entire world. And all the other retailers in the world would come to Marshall Fields to see how it was done. The Macy's and Gimbels and all the other people, they would come and copy off Marshall Fields the man. The State Street store by this point covered an entire city block, 35 acres, 65 display windows. Marshall Fields by this point had a transit stop. Marshall Fields the man was on the board of the CTA, and when they were looking for a place on State Street to have their transit stop, how convenient. He's like, oh, well, we could just do it here at Marshall Fields. And so on the second floor was where the transit stop was. So for you to go anywhere on State Street, you had to go in Marshall Fields and down the stairs and out. Yeah, he was really smart, wasn't he? So to go to Carson's, for example, you would have to walk through Marshall Fields and out of Marshall Fields and then go to Carson's. In addition to that, they offered long distance phone services. Some of us may remember the day where when you made a wrong number, Nora, you will have no idea about this, but there was a time where you dialed the wrong number and you would call the operator for a credit because it was so expensive to call a long distance number. Well, there was a time where people didn't have phones in their homes. Yeah. And so they would go to Marshall Fields to make a phone call. Isn't that fascinating? At one time, Marshall Fields had every phone book in. So if you needed to look up a phone number, you could go to Marshall Fields and find a phone number. Again, this has nothing to do with them selling more shoes. So they really became full service. You could mail a letter at Marshall Fields. You could send a telegraph, which I've never done, but if you needed to do it, you could do it there. Stenography, maybe you needed somebody to type a letter for you. Travel agency, concierge, and some of you read ahead, I can tell. It's a great story of at least one divorced couple, the man and then the ex-wife, they did not get along, they did not want to see each other. So how are they going to transfer the check? This is way before electronic payments. So he drops it at Marshall Fields, and then she comes to Marshall Fields to pick it up. Marshall Fields holds this woman's alimony check. Is that not the smartest thing ever? Because when Marshall Fields is holding your alimony check, you now have money in Marshall Fields. So, and again, when I think about all the places, if I was going to have someone hold my money, I don't know that I would think today about, Bloomingdale's. I'm going to have them hold my money and I'll come and get it every 2 weeks, right? It wouldn't occur to me unless they work there. Good job. But, who would think of a department store being a neutral arbiter of a fund transfer on a regular basis? It speaks to the place, the role that Marshall Fields had in people's lives. So the phrase "give the lady what she wants." We love to say that Marshall Fields said that. Can we be sure? Definitely not. But we can pretend that he said it. Maybe he did. It's hard to say. But the idea of "give the lady what she wants" really does embody the Marshall Fields spirit. So Marshall Fields focused on high quality, no matter how much an item cost. And that was a big deal. This is the era of the snake oil salesman, selling basically, 30 proof alcohol in a bottle, and it'll cure all your problems. And it did for a little bit. But anyway, like people sold things all the time that didn't work, and that was on you. Sorry, too bad. And you couldn't return them. You were just stuck. So Marshall Fields changed all that in a dramatic way and made people feel very loyal to them. First of all, like they looked at making you a customer for life, not just a customer for this one transaction. You know, there may be some businesses you buy anything from and you're like, I'm never going there again. You know, Marshall Fields made sure you felt good about what you bought and wanted to go back a second time, a third time. So Marshall Fields, long game. That was not the thing back in the day. Back in the day, it was, you know, businesses were opening and closing all the time and changing partners, and that was just how it was. So Marshall Fields was very different. In addition, they took returns, which was unheard of. No one took returns. When you bought something, it was yours. And again, when I worked at men's sportswear in the 90s, I was supposed to say, wow, you don't know. But when I worked in men's sportswear, we had people that would bring things back that were, you know, 7, 8 years old with the receipt, and we'd take it back as long as they had a receipt. Yeah, I know, exactly. And many of them still had the tag on, which was where it got really funny. And so we'd have to give them whatever the price was that they paid. And then I would scan it to put it back on the floor. And sometimes it would be like 47 cents. And then I would tuck it under and buy it myself and bring it up. So my fiance, later my husband, he ended up getting a really nice wardrobe for Marshall Fields that way. But the idea was like, we'll take returns. And that gave people confidence to try to buy things that they weren't sure about if you felt like you could return it. That was very reassuring to people at a time where you buy it and you're too bad for you. They also didn't lie about products. You know, they'll tell you exactly what it did and didn't do without faking it. When you don't have to return it, you can say whatever you want to say. It doesn't really matter because you're not taking it back. Your goal is just to sell the thing. And then if people hate you later, tough. Big deal. Marshall Fields was thinking, like, I want you to be a customer for life. I don't want to take advantage of you. They also stopped haggling over prices. So at this point, you would go in to buy something, and then you'd have to haggle with the salespeople about how much to pay. Women particularly hated that, and Marshall Fields realized that. So they set the price. They made it a fair price, and that was the price. Marshall Fields, the man, is quoted as saying, "We are the servants of the public," and this really spoke to women. They also started publishing fashionable newspapers and ads in magazines and newspapers to help women identify current styles, and Ken's got a couple examples of that over there as well. So Marshall Fields has changed the game in retailing, and that ended up being very, very popular. Marshall Fields led the way in all these areas. So the use of lavish window displays. And I'll tell you, the window display story is just great. So in the very early days, windows were just a place to love it. And sometimes not very much like because they were dirty. So the windows were not seen as a place to sell stuff. And it occurred to Marshall Fields that, hey, we could, you know, use these as display. So the first mannequins that they used were wax. Yeah, some of you have already got there about Chicago Summers, and in a way, can you imagine the kids as the mannequins? So it didn't take them very long to realize maybe wax is not how we want to go here. So pretty quickly they ended up with wood mannequins, but they realized this is an opportunity to get people's attention and to sell things. And for anybody who's here, I think we all have enjoyed looking at those window displays. Like it's something fun and special, and it's an opportunity for them to sell things. They were the first to offer a sales office in Europe, and that is a huge deal because Europe is where all the fashions were coming out of around the turn of the century. And the other department stores were waiting until those products came to the United States to decide what they wanted to buy, not buy in stock. And then they placed the orders, and then later the orders would show up. Well, Marshall Fields had people on the ground in Paris and other places. So as soon as those items were available, as soon as they had been designed, they're like, oh, we'll take blah, blah, blah. And then they were at Marshall Fields first. People actually came to Marshall Fields from all across the country. They would literally make Marshall Fields part of their vacation plans in the summer. Some of them would come a couple times a year for their wardrobe, their seasonal wardrobe, like you do. Bridal registry, that's another one that's smart. There was no bridal registry at one point, and Marshall Fields was among the first. And it is a little tricky in history to know who's first because they're all selling things. So of course they all want to say we're the first. So it's sometimes a little hard to parse out who actually was first. So in all of these, Marshall Fields was either first or among the first. So I just give you that disclaimer. But the idea of a bridal registry was really clever because you get brides in there who are buying all the new stuff and everybody who's buying something for them at Marshall Fields. How great. A bargain basement. So that was important because it allowed people at all different economic levels to buy things at Marshall Field. And it gave them a place to get rid of their clearance. You know, you can't store that stuff forever. You have to get it moved out. The bargain basement was great for that. Dining rooms, suburban branches. And I think many of you, I'm assuming, are suburban branch aficionados, right? Oak Brook was my suburban branch, but I'm assuming none of you really spent as much time in Oak Brook as you did in Lake Forest, given where you're at right now. Escalators. There was a time before escalators, and of course, by the 1930s, escalators were available. Marshall Fields was one of the first places. Okay, I just cannot. I remember my first time on an escalator. You may remember yours. Just how cool that is, and to all of a sudden to be able to, you know, up and down like that. Revolving credit for retail. There was a time where you didn't get credit. You had to have money in your hand to be able to buy something. We all know we are much quicker to buy things when we don't have to count out our pennies to be able to make that purchase, right? If I'm limited to the cash on hand, I don't actually think I even have any cash on hand, so I would buy nothing. But being able to charge it makes an enormous difference. Personal shopping. Just like that. And literally, I laugh because I thought about putting images in the presentation of the personal shopping space, but and that's what it was. Literally, it was a bunch of desks and women mostly sitting at the desk with the phone, just like that, taking calls and then going out and finding things on the shopping floor. And it looks like a 50s office, like bullpen where you know secretaries would have sat, you know, boom 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 boom. That's what it looks like, which is why I'm like, I can't put that in there because it doesn't really look like Marshall Field, but it was. But those personal shoppers were super important to the whole experience. If you didn't live in Chicago, you could actually reach out to them and say, here are my sizes, can you send me a wardrobe for spring? And they would do it. A whole wardrobe, just send it to you. I mean, I guess there are businesses that will do that today, but I don't know that I trust them like I would have trusted Marshall Fields to do that. And there's a great story, not even a personal shopper, but there are stories of men on their way to work in the morning, asking the doorman at Marshall Fields, you know, hey Steve, or whatever his name was, it's the wife's birthday today, or it's our anniversary. Did you have something put together, you know, for when I'm on my way home? And then he would, and they would walk back and you know, here you go, all wrapped up, ready to give to your wife. Like, wow, that's pretty impressive. Same day delivery for in-store purchases. Now this is another one. When I worked at the Woodfield store in the 90s, I had one woman who came in and bought, I'm not exaggerating, 25 men's shirts. 25. Yeah. It's like it was one of my first days too. I'm trying to get all those gift receipts and boxes all lined up. I'm like, oh, I'm still not sure it turned out. But anyway, she couldn't carry 25 boxes. So the fact that she could actually pick them up at that point or even have them delivered means you can buy more stuff. If you're limited to the stuff you can carry, you can't buy as much stuff. And remember how good you felt when those green trucks showed up? Or you saw them in the street? You know, it's like the Amazon delivery guy now. We're like, oh, what's it going to be? So 95,000 packages on average. It's a lot of packages. And they were, get this, I'm kind of shocked that it took so long, but apparently Marshall Fields was like the first guy to go, maybe we should get women to sell women's underwear. Can you imagine trying to buy your unmentionables from a man? That would have been at a time where showing your ankles was scandalous. That would have been really complicated. So Marshall Fields was one of the first to make sure that was available as well. So they were pioneering book signings. They had people like Shirley Temple, Amelia Earhart, Carl Sandburg, and Judy the Elephant. Yeah, this is an image of Judy the Elephant. She didn't actually write the book, even though she's credited as the author. You can see in her trunk, she's got a stamper. So she's not actually signing the book, she's stamping the book with her trunk. But it's still pretty darn cool, right? Yeah. So this is, I'm gonna write it. This is gonna be a tooth-fairy moment for everybody. This Judy, that's not Judy the Elephant. That is an elephant from the Lincoln Park Zoo that they brought in. Not Judy. So they brought this elephant in on the freight elevator. The elephant is on the third floor where the book signing is happening. Marshall Fields is the largest book retailer in the country at this point. Well, the elephant, I don't know. Sometimes weird things pop away and I'm like, well, what about the bathroom? How do they deal with that? I don't know. But at the end of the day, the elephant was like, I'm not getting back in the freight elevator. I'm not doing it. And then Marshall Fields is like, but you have to. And the elephant's like, make me. And so they had a serious problem. What are they going to do? So they actually, and there's a whole page on the Pepper Construction website dedicated to this. So feel free to fact check me. They called in Pepper Construction, who was like kind of their go-to emergency people. And Pepper Construction came in and built a ramp down 2 flights of stairs to get the elephant out of the building. And that was officially the last time an elephant went into the fields. I am positive they're like, I don't care if an elephant makes a bestseller, we're not doing that again. But what a cool experience to be a kid and have, Judy the Elephant sign your book. I mean, that's just amazing. By the mid-20th century, and we're getting to the place where we might have some familiarity with Marshall Fields. By the mid-20th century, they had like everything, all the good things. On-site millinery, silver, jewelry, watch repair, optical workroom. You can get your glasses there. You can get your photos developed. Remember when we had to do that? Yeah, a lot of things we don't do anymore. Stationery, draperies, china repair, lamp repair, picture framing, complimentary personal shopping, and if you've read ahead, you've already read this, the largest restaurant in Chicago at one time, the Walnut Room. And they averaged about 5,000 people a day, which is incredible. And their one-day record was 13,155 people in that restaurant, in and out. Can you imagine how many chicken pot pies that is? That is a lot of chicken pot pies. So, and you just have to, that was the place to go. That was part of the experience. If you went to Marshall Fields, you certainly went to one of the restaurants, and there you are. At one time, Chicago's second largest restaurant was also a Marshall Fields restaurant. Does anyone remember that one? It was not part of the State Street store or any store. It was somewhere else.
Just the one in Midway?
It was, I'm gonna keep my eye on you. You're after my job. Do you remember what it was called?
Do not.
So, okay. It was the Cloud restaurant. So yeah, and there was a time where you would go to the airport to watch the planes take off. Way before TSA or any of that. You would actually just go there and watch the planes. And that was at one time the second largest restaurant in Chicago, was that restaurant at Marshall. You have a menu?
Yeah, and coffee shop, I guess.
Oh my gosh, she's got everything. Okay, so Ken has a menu for that as well, so if you want to see that. So,
Pictures.
pictures, he's got pictures. Okay, just pictures, it's not good enough. Confusing. So, let's talk a little bit about the walnut room. We've got Mrs. Herring's chicken pot pie. There are Mrs. Herring's chicken pot pie. The problem with this is it's a Selfridge story, and Harry Selfridge was a lot of things, but a person who always told exactly the truth, maybe not as much. He was a salesman. So the story about Mrs. Herring's chicken pot pie goes several different ways, but essentially the deal is that there were a group of women shopping who got hungry and they were like, we gotta go, we're hungry. This is before there are restaurants in the store. They were like, we're gonna have to go home, sorry, we'll come back and shop later. And the salesperson was like, no, don't leave. I'll share my lunch with you. And of course, in my head, I'm like, okay, fishes and loaves, like how big is your lunch that you can share it with a bunch of people? But whether it was one woman or several women, depending on the version of the story, it changes. So anyway, because she worked commercial films, was able to set up this nice meal for these women. And depending on which version you hear, she might have a tablecloth and china, all the stuff, sets up this nice lunch. And these ladies eat lunch and we're like, well, can we come back tomorrow? And that Harry Selfridge took this to Marshall Fields and said, hey, we gotta have some restaurants. Is it true? Is it not? It's a good story, right? So Mrs. Herring supposedly was this saleswoman's mother or grandmother who made the chicken pot pie. So that is where that is supposed to have come from. The Christmas tree in the walnut room, 45 feet, thousands of lights decorated. In the early days, it was an actual pine tree. And Marshall Fields had two different fires in the State Street store, so they actually hired somebody to sit up all night and watch the tree so it didn't burn down. Can you imagine? That would be a really boring job. Especially before we had our phones to play with all night long, right? So they did actually have somebody to make sure that things were safe. I put an image of the Frango, but of course we have a better version in the back. Thank you very much for Real Deal. Frangos, do you know about Frangos?
From the Frederick and Nelson store. And
I should just leave now. Yeah, so Frangos were a big deal in a store on the West Coast that Marshall Fields, the store, acquired. And this was one of their signature products. And they thought, well, these are great. Let's bring them to Chicago. So even after they sold those stores, they kept the candy. Yay for that. So some of you may remember them being produced in the store, the white uniforms. I'm so impressed by that. I mean, could you make chocolate in a white uniform and not have a mess? I could not. So Frangos, that's where those came from. The 28 shop. Did anybody get to shop at the 28 shop? Yeah. So that opened in 1941, which maybe wasn't the best timing with Pearl Harbor coming in World War II. But in 1941, it opened. It was one of the first in-store boutiques. And this was a big deal because they could bring couture into the store and have this separate experience, this more elite sort of experience. So they had a private elevator. You go in the Washington Street entrance, and 28 East Washington Street is where the door was, and you go right up in the elevator, completely separate, which is where they got the name 28 shop from. It's 28 East Washington. They had 28 private dressing rooms. Each of them were designed by the Jonathan Wood designer. Now there were 14 of each, and then each one was replicated once. These dressing rooms were large, and again, you can see, just like when I go shopping today, I sit on the couch and somebody comes in a maid uniform and pours tea for me, and somebody else tries all the clothes on. That is exactly how it goes. But that is, at least in the beginning, that is how they had it set up. So that was a very innovative sort of opportunity for shopping. Between 1831 and 1914, Marshall Fields bought the entire block of State Wabash, Washington, and Randolph for their State Street store. Now, funny enough, the original store belonged to the Singer Sewing Company, and Marshall Fields rented it. Originally, it was just 5 stories. burned down in the Great Chicago Fire. There was another fire a few years later, burned down again. And they were given the option to buy the whole block, and they were like, no, we're good, we're fine. And then guess who bought do you know? Do you know who got it? Okay, does anybody know? You know, no, you can't, you know. You want to say it?
Person.
Parsons. Yeah. So that was one of the only mistakes the Fields company made besides letting Macy's rename it. They, because now Parsons owns part of the property, like next to their building. They realized they couldn't continue to expand, and they certainly didn't want Parsons coming right in there. So they ended up buying the property from Parsons at a premium. So that was maybe not their finest moment. In addition to that, they have the annex for men, like we talked about. They also owned a 7-story warehouse or wholesale building that was on Adams, Quincy, Wells, and Franklin. They owned the merchandise mart until now. Yeah, they were the ones that built that. So it is still the world's largest commercial building. Still, it opened. This is awkward timing. 1931. Is that the year to open the world's largest commercial real estate building? If you know your history, you know no, it's not at all. So from the start, they had problems with that. Who did they end up selling it to? Yes, Joseph P. Kennedy ended up buying it. And the Kennedy family only sold it fairly recently. I think it was even in this century. Yeah, it was, which is funny because sometimes my students now, like, you were born in the 1900s, right? No. So Fields, in addition to that, they also owned 29 textile mills in the South. So what they did is, in these mills, they were producing field crust products. Field crust, right? They were producing the products at their own mills and then shipping the goods to their stores. So what does that do for them? It makes the product cheaper because they're not having to buy it from some other company. It gives them the ability to control quality much more easily. They did use a company store kind of model like Pullman, but Marshall Fields, the man, was always smart enough to pay people just enough that they weren't going to get angry. Like, he didn't pay them like super generously, but he always paid them enough that he didn't have the problems that Pullman and some other people ended up having. And funny enough, he actually ended up being an interim president of the Pullman Car Company after George left the position. So here is a advertisement for the Marshall Fields wholesale dry goods, carpets, and upholstery building. And again, let's remember that this is where they were making a lot of their money for a very long time. By this point, it is no longer Field and Lighter, and I never did tell you the end of the Levi Lighter story. So let me tell you, he was a bit of a curmudgeon. He was the money guy, and Marshall Field's the man got a little frustrated with him because he was, he did not want regional credit. He did, he was all. And it worked out very well for them in the Great Chicago Fire because they had no debt. Most other businesses had significant debt, and when the fire happened, they were in dire straits. They had to pay for merchandise that they couldn't sell because they burned up in the fire. And Marshall Fields, Field and Lighter, they were a cash-based company. They didn't buy things on credit, so they were in a much better position. Well, anyway, Marshall Fields, the man, is kind of done with Levi, so. The wheel messes me up. So anyway, he ended up asking Levi what Levi thought the business was worth. Levi said a number, thinking that, he might buy Marshall out. And then Marshall Fields had actually, in the background, put together a consortium. And he's like, oh, $500 million? Okay, here you go. So Levi later ended up moving to Lake Geneva. His daughter, and how many of you are Downton Abbey fans? Anybody Downton Abbey? No one? Okay, there you go. All right, so Mary Leiter was one of the first dollar princesses, Levi Leiter's daughter. She ended up being the number 2 highest ranking woman in the aristocracy in England after Queen Victoria. Her husband became the head, I can't remember what the title is, but the head guy in India. And Viceroy, thank you. Yeah, so she was the number 2 woman as far as status goes in English society, and that was his daughter. His son, on the other hand, bet the farm in a period where the economy went south, and that was where a lot of the money ended up going. So, anyway, let's talk a little bit about Marshall Fields, and we'll compare it to any place you might have worked. So, by 1906, Marshall Fields, this is the State Street store, they've got 12,000 permanent employees. It's a lot of employees. You could not eat or use tobacco in the store or gossip. I would love to know how they stop people from gossiping at work. Has anyone else been able to master how you stop gossiping at work? Yeah, you duct tape. That might be the only way. So at a time where women didn't have a lot of career options, Marshall Fields had cachet. Even when I worked at Marshall Fields in the 90s, and again, oh my gosh, she looks so young. Even then, it was when people were like, ooh, Marshall Fields. And it's like, yeah, it's my part-time job until I get married, so I can buy all my wedding stuff super cheap. This is awesome. But people were still impressed in the 90s, like, oh, that's so cool, you work at Marshall Field. So you have to imagine 100 years earlier, that would have been a very big deal indeed. So it had cachet, even though it wasn't the place where you made the most money, it was definitely some status. If you've seen the Selfridges, the Masterpiece Theater, Selfridge, series on PBS. Some of you look like like some of you are nodding yes, and others of you are looking at me bewildered. But if you watch that, you'll see kind of that same vibe with the women who are working there. They're proud to have those jobs, and that's how it was at Marshall Fields. The State Street store had a branch library. Anybody's job have a branch library? Mine has a library, but most of them don't. A chorus. Mine is a chorus too. Does yours got a chorus? An employee dining room. We've got that too. Individual lockers for every employee. Cloakrooms, restrooms, lunchrooms, an employee newsletter. Vacation time, and a time where you didn't really always get it. You got 2 weeks after a year's service. Yeah. Individually arranged, but generally unlimited sick time and some paid holidays. Marshall Fields, the man, was not very excited about giving you stuff if you asked him for it. He did not like to be asked. So if you're like, my mom's sick and I have, no. But if he knew you were struggling and you didn't ask for it, he was the most generous guy. Oh my goodness, I heard your mother is sick. I'm going to give you 3 months off to go be with her. So he would make those kind of arrangements. There was a men's gym. Now notice, ladies, we didn't get a gym. We got a recreation room. There was a company hospital. You may not go there for open heart surgery, but if you think of kind of the doc in the box, that's sort of what they have there. I mean, this is a department store with a hospital in it. Wow. They educated their cash boys. So back in the day, they had boys that their job was to sit in strategic locations, and when someone called them, they would run up to the cash register, take the money if they needed change, run it up to where the change was available, make the change, and run the money back down. That was their job. They were called cash boys. And Marshall Fields, the man, was really concerned about them having an education. These boys generally were not, they were poor and they weren't expected to get much of an education, and they were just going to make their way in the world. And he was like, no, let's make sure, let's work this out so you get educated. That's really an impressive thing. The cash boys were replaced by pneumatic tubes. If you've been to the bank, yeah, I love those. Don't you? Anyway, he had an arrangement with Illinois Trust and Savings. He was on the board. So he arranged for them to have employee savings accounts. No matter how much they put in there, they got 6%.
Wow.
I know. I have some money I would like to deposit there. 6% is pretty good. Back then it was pretty good too. So Marshall Fields, as you all know, 2005, renamed Macy's. Yeah. So, but it's interesting. There are still people protesting 20 years later. Now, Think about what that means. Like how, things that happened 20 years ago, how many of those things are you still holding a grudge about? But you're holding a grudge about Macy's, aren't you, a little bit? 20 years later. Isn't that incredible? That says so much about about the role that Marshall Fields played in your lives. The role they played in all the good moments, the celebrations you had there, the way you were treated there, all of that speaks to why people are willing to go out in November and march around and be upset about Marshall Fields. Now, Marshall Fields, when they dedicated the Christmas tree this last November, they also announced that they were renaming the Walnut Room, the Marshall Fields Walnut Room. I know. I know Ted and I were there for that. So that was pretty cool. So they also are starting to sell Marshall Fields merchandise there, like bags, tote bags, and notebooks, and water bottles and stuff. And it's interesting because I'm kind of thinking maybe they're starting to realize, like, oh, there's some interest in this. So we'll see. They have some shopping-ish bags. They're not quite like what we're used to, but they do even have some of that. So when I think about Marshall Fields, and I think about, again, the fact that 20 years later, this many of you, like this program sold out 20 years after the thing. Most of the time, when like Venture or, I'm thinking about other stores, Carson's. How many of us are going to come to a program about Carson's? Look at all your hands now go up. One person. Okay, so it just, again, it speaks to the role. Marshall Fields was very much involved in pretty much every important event in Chicago history. From the Eastland disaster, the Iroquois Theater fire, big events, snowstorms, blizzards, they were willing to open their doors when there was a blizzard and just let people in. And if you were stranded, just come in and get some blankets and towels and a toothbrush and whatever you need. Like they were always very much part of the city of Chicago, and that was another important role that they played, which is why it means so much to us. So thank you very much for your attention. And now we can